Shabbat Shalom. Welcome back to another sermon here at Nazarene Way Church. We are a church that believes in restoring the true message of Jesus, of Yeshua, of Jesus the Nazarene, of the man who was a Judean and was a Hebrew. And we do not believe in the typical Pauline Christianity, or what I call Hawaiian shirt Christianity. We believe in becoming Jesus maximalists, restoring the actual true message of Jesus, as well as his brother, James the Just, and their sect called the Nazarenes, and the poor ones, the Ebonites, who you can read about in Epiphanius's Panarion. We also ascribe to the following canon. Our canon is simple. You may ask, hey, do you guys believe in the Bible? Well, actually, we believe in the same exact Bible that Jesus the Nazarene believed in, and that is the Hebrew Bible, which is made up of the Torah, the prophets, and the writings. This taken together is called the Hebrew Bible, or the Tanakh. We also know from history and from the patristics that the Nazarenes, Jesus' earliest followers, his disciples, kept their own gospel, the gospel of the Hebrews. It was a gospel that we have fragments of, thanks to all of the Catholic Church fathers that declared the group heretical and started quoting their gospels. So we have fragments of their gospel, which is essentially believed to have been the Hebrew gospel of Matthew minus the first two chapters, which includes the Davidic line and the nativity story. So for the time being, until we actually rediscover the lost gospel of the Hebrews, probably written first and maybe even before Mark, the first written gospel that we actually have, we take out the Hebrew gospel of Matthew, and then we take a razor blade and we cut out the first two chapters. That is our canon for now. We also look to other texts such as the Clementine literature, the recognition, the homilies. We look at the Didache, and even the Gospel of Thomas. And from there, from many different sources, even from canonical sources, from Acts, with a careful eye, we can glean out and excavate the true message of Jesus the Nazarene. So with that out of the way, let's dive in. Today's sermon, it revolves around, and it is talked, or it is essentially called... I don't know if you can hear that, but pardon my humble beginning of the Nazarene Way Church. We're starting as a house church, just like the first church led by James, the brother, the actual biological brother of Jesus, the Jerusalem church. Anyways, I said something that triggered that Renob Siri over there. And if you want to know what Renob is, that's what we use for a term that is better than saying the R word. Renob is boner spelled backwards. Okay, so anytime someone does a stupid error, just like Siri does over there and thinks that we're talking to her, just call her a Renob. All right, anyway, with that out of the way, we're going to segue into the title and the main message of this sermon, which is titled, Eat Your Bread, My Brother. And where this sermon derives from is very interesting. It actually derives from one of the few fragments that we have of the Nazarenes, of Jesus' first disciples, of James the Just, the Gospel of the Nazarenes, the Hebrew Gospel of the Nazarenes. And it's a fragment. This relates to James the Just, the forgotten brother. So believe it or not, if you actually read Mark, I think it's Mark 6, verse 3, you can actually see a roster of Jesus' siblings. Believe it or not, yes, Jesus had siblings. And Jesus' eldest brother was James the Just, James the brother of the Lord, as Eusebius calls him. And James the Just was not one of the 12 disciples initially, but he was Jesus' brothers. He later on became the leader of the church after Jesus died. And this is referred to in Acts and Galatians. He was the primary pillar. There was 3 pillars after Jesus died. There was James and his right-hand man named Simon, or Cephas, otherwise known as Simon Peter. And then there was John. Those were the 3 pillars of Jerusalem, and James was the leader. And anyway, James was called James the Just or James the Righteous because he was Torah observant. He was humble. He has a famous book that's essentially absconded and hidden stuffed into the back of the Catholic New Testament called, basically the Book of James. And if you read it, it rubbed a lot of people the wrong way because he said the exact opposite the exact opposite message that Paul taught. Paul taught a message that you can just fart around and, have faith and be saved. Whereas James the Just said, hey, faith doesn't matter. What matters more than faith is action, your works. Do you actually follow the Torah? Do you get down on a knee and pray for the homeless and help them and give them money? Or give them clothes, it's even better than money. Give them clothes, give them food. Don't necessarily give them money because they could be, essentially stuck in a never-ending kind of like spiral of, purchasing drugs. So do what I've done. Like I was a psychopath when I lived in downtown San Diego. I would literally march into 7-Eleven. It didn't matter what time it was. Sometimes it would be late at night. I would go in there at 12 a.m. and I would call to the homeless outside of 7-Eleven. I would say, hey, come in. I'm going to buy whatever you want. And they didn't buy up 50 things. They bought 3 things. They were respectful. Whatever they wanted, I bought it for them. So do the same thing. Be a G. Be like Jesus was. Be a spiritual gangster. Don't be like the 99.99% of the modern day Christians out there who just send, maybe, 5 of their congregation members over to Africa, and then the remaining 99.99% of the congregation just, sits in their seat and watches on the Jumbotron and feels good about themselves while they smell their own farts. That's modern day Christianity. No, be like James the Just. Be like James the Righteous. Action matters more than faith, period. And anyway, James, after the death of Jesus, we find this from the Gospel of the Nazarenes, thanks to Jerome, the church father, who we have the fragment of the Gospel of the Nazarenes, thanks to Jerome. James, the brother of Jesus, after Jesus had died, he swore not to eat until he saw the risen Messiah. He fasted. He said, no, I'm not eating. I'm sick to my stomach. I will not eat or touch any food until I see Jesus, until I see the Messiah rise again. And so guess what James did? James was righteous. James was a man of action. He didn't mess around. He didn't put lip service to anything. James had sworn not to eat one thing, not to eat bread until he saw Jesus risen. He took a vow of mourning, and we know for a fact that James was a Nazarite, which means you don't cut your hair, you don't drink alcohol, you don't drink wine, you don't touch any grapes, and you don't go near any dead bodies, right? So no Catholic funerals for you, okay? He consecrated himself to God. He made himself holy. He took the Nazarite vow, which is the same exact vow that Samson took. And James was a man of action. Not only did he do that, we also know James was a vegetarian. We know this from Epiphanius' account and from Eusebius' account and many other accounts. James was a man who walked the talk. And when Jesus died, he did the same. He took another vow. He said, not only will I not eat meat, not only will I not, drink alcohol, not drink wine, I will not touch a morsel of food. I will not touch bread until I see my brother, the Messiah, who I believe is the Messiah, rise again. James represents the one who waits not for emotion, but for real evidence. And so many of us, we just, act based off of emotion, right? He did not wait for emotion. He did not have emotion succumb him. He said, no, you know what? I'm going to sit here. I'm going to fast. I'm going to keep to myself. I'm going to hold myself back from eating, from any of the things that I want, even from starvation. And that hunger is going to make me focus on the Messiah, on what I believe in. And we know this from the Gospel of the Nazarenes, which is really fascinating because we don't find this in our canonical Gospels. Jesus then, when he arose and came to the James, and guess who he came to first? He came to James first, not Peter, not anyone else. We find that the earliest gospel accounts, the Gospel of the Hebrews, he came to James. And Jesus took bread and he blessed it and he broke it and he gave it to James. And so I want to point something out. This action of what he did here, what Jesus did here, it echoes Passover. It happened in the upper room, right? But here, there was no crowd, no one surrounding Jesus. It was just brother to brother. Think of that moment. It was Jesus and his brother. And his brother, think about what was going on through James's mind, who he saw his brother die, the man that he believed in, James the righteous. You know, kind of James was a man, like what we get the sense of when we study James, we get the sense that he was, you know, the stoic brother, kind of more of the quiet type. And he just walked the straight line. He was James the righteous. There's even rumors of him and accounts of him. I believe it is in the Clementine literature. And by the way, when I say the pseudo-Clementines or Clementine literature, I mean these are early documents, I think 2nd and 3rd century, but likely come from a source even earlier than that, maybe even a source that both Acts, the canonical Acts, and the Clementine literature both used and pulled from, very early sources. And they say that, you know, James's knees were like the skin of camels. They were just so calloused because he would go and pray so often. James was like this stoic character, a man of action. And Jesus said to him, "Eat your bread." So he looked to his brother and he said, "Eat your bread." And that's a symbol that when he says, "Eat your bread," he says, "I want you, my brother, to return to life, just as I have returned to life." And he said, here's the full quote. He said, "Eat your bread, for the Son of Man is risen." That is what Jesus said. And so this is a call. Break the fast, rejoin life, step into your purpose. So after James had fasted, Jesus came back to him, appreciated his faith, and said, "Eat your bread, for the Son of Man, the Messiah, has risen." And when the Messiah restores you, he sends you. Now, what's very interesting, and what many of the Nazarenes believed, and the early, Ebonites believed, is not necessarily, it's not as cut and dry of was it actually a physical flesh resurrection, or was James seeing a spiritual resurrection, which is actually what Paul claims he said, and it's like the first account of Jesus' resurrection. Not an actual, hey, stick your finger in my wounds, a flesh resurrection, which could have been maybe a later on mythology tacked on to the story of Jesus, right? Many decades, if not centuries after the death of Jesus. The early Nazarenes and Ebonites believed that Jesus did not necessarily rise from the dead. He was a great prophet. He was the Son of Man. And he may have appeared to James, especially if James was fasting and in a state where he could be in touch spiritually with God, where Jesus appeared to James and, gave James the call, the message that eat your bread, the Son of Man has risen. Eat your bread, return to life. And so James didn't preach right away when he got this message. He simply resumed. Hi, Frank. This is one of our congregation members, Frank, if you can see him. Frank is actually a righteous individual as well. Frank is a righteous congregation member, aren't you, Frank? Anyway, James didn't preach right away. He simply resumed his quiet and faithful leadership. We know that. James led with just a stoic demeanor. He was a man that walked the straight line. And sometimes resurrection looks like getting up and just simply eating again. But what James did is important, and I think we all need to do, is fast. Sit with yourself, pray, and take some time. Even if it's not necessarily, it doesn't have to be a 3-day fast like James, took up upon himself. It could be a 3-hour fast. It could be, skip a meal type of fast and pray and get in touch with God, with the I Am. So, on that note, stay faithful, just like James the Just. Eat your bread. The Son of Man is risen after your fast, after you pray, and take action action over faith. Peace and love, and I will see you next week. Shabbat Shalom.